On graduation day, my parents threw my sister a party. I came home to an empty house and a note. Leftovers in the fridge. I ate alone in silence. The next morning, I was gone. A year later, Dad left a voicemail. I still haven't played it. My name's Noah. I'm 26, and I want to tell you about the day I realized I was invisible to the people who were supposed to love me the most. Not invisible like a superpower, which honestly would have been kind of cool. Invisible like you could be standing in the middle of the room, talking, breathing, existing, and no one would even glance in your direction. That kind of invisible. The kind that makes you wonder if maybe you're the problem. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. Let me back up a little. I grew up in a mid-sized town in North Carolina, the kind of place where everyone goes to the same 3 restaurants and pretends the barbecue spot on Elm Street is a hidden gem, even though the parking lot is always full. My family was what most people would call normal from the outside. Dad worked in commercial insurance. Mom was a part-time office manager at a dental practice. And then there was me and my younger sister, Elise. Elise is 2 years younger than me. And if you asked my parents, she hung the moon, the stars, and probably invented gravity while she was at it. Now look, I'm not one of those people who blames everything on sibling rivalry. I get it. Parents aren't robots. Sometimes the dynamic just shakes out a certain way. But there's a difference between a slight lean and a full-on architectural collapse in one direction. In my family, Elise was the sun, and I was whatever rock happens to be floating in the dark on the opposite side of the solar system. I don't even think it was malicious, at least not at first. It just was. Elise was the loud one, the performer, the kid who would sing at family gatherings and make the aunts cry. She did theater in middle school, cheerleading in high school, student council, homecoming court, the whole highlight reel. And every single thing she did, my parents were front row. Mom once drove 45 minutes in a thunderstorm to watch Elise's junior year talent show where she sang a Carrie Underwood song. I'm not even exaggerating when I say I had a cross-country meet the same weekend that was 15 minutes from our house, and neither of them showed up. Dad said he forgot. Mom said she thought it was the following week. It was on the fridge calendar, in red ink, that I wrote there myself. I was the quiet kid. Good grades, not great. Ran track, played a little guitar, kept to myself mostly. I wasn't causing problems, but I also wasn't giving anyone a reason to put me on a pedestal. And in my family, if you weren't performing, you were furniture. I learned pretty early that asking for attention was like yelling into a canyon. You'd hear your own voice bounce back, and that was about it. There were 100 little moments over the years that chipped away at me. The time Elise got a brand new car for her 16th birthday, a used Honda Accord, nothing crazy, but still. I got my license 6 months earlier and was told to take the bus until I could save up for my own. The time Mom threw a surprise party for Elise's acceptance into state, and I found out I got into UNC Charlotte from a letter I opened alone at the kitchen counter while everyone was out getting Elise's celebration cake. I remember standing there holding this envelope, reading the word congratulations, and the house was completely empty. I put the letter on the fridge myself. It stayed there for 2 days before Mom noticed and said, "Oh, that's nice, honey. That's nice, honey," for words that could summarize my entire childhood. But I kept going. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd make my own way, that once I graduated and got out into the world, I'd build something they couldn't ignore. I put my head down, worked hard through college, double majored in finance and economics, held down a part-time job at a bookstore near campus, and graduated with honors. Not summa, but solid. Dean's List. I was proud of myself. I really was. And maybe, just maybe, I thought this would be the thing that made them see me. Graduation day was in May. Beautiful weather, the kind of spring day that feels like the universe is giving you a thumbs up. I woke up that morning feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hopeful. I ironed my white shirt, put on my tie, looked at myself in the mirror, and thought, today they'll be proud. Today is my day. The ceremony was at 2 in the afternoon. I had told my parents about it weeks in advance. I had texted the details. I had literally printed out a schedule and left it on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker where Dad stands every morning like a zombie waiting for caffeine to revive him. They said they'd be there. Both of them. Elise too. Supposedly, though she was finishing up her sophomore year at State, and I figured that was a coin toss. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, and looked out into the crowd. I scanned the rows, looking for my parents. I figured maybe they were in the back, or maybe they were running late, Or maybe Dad parked in the wrong lot because the man has the directional sense of a confused pigeon. I told myself a dozen little stories to explain the empty feeling in my chest. They weren't there. I found out later what happened, and honestly, this is where the story starts to go from sad to something else entirely. While I was walking across a stage in a cap and gown, collecting a degree I'd worked for years for, my parents were at home throwing a party. For Elise. She had been named vice president of her sorority. Vice president of a sorority. And apparently that warranted a full backyard celebration with streamers, a cake from that fancy bakery downtown, and about 20 of her friends. I drove home after the ceremony still in my gown because I didn't want to change in a parking garage like some kind of graduation gremlin. I pulled into the driveway, and the first thing I noticed was the cars. There were cars everywhere. For a second I thought, oh my God, they threw me a surprise party. My heart actually lifted. I felt this rush of warmth, this split second of believing that maybe I'd been wrong about everything, that maybe they really did care, and this was their way of making up for not being at the ceremony. I walked through the front door, and the house was empty. I could hear music and laughter coming from the backyard. I walked through the kitchen and saw it. Streamers on the back porch. A banner that said, "Congrats Elise," in pink and gold letters. A table full of food. My mom laughing with Elise's friends. My dad flipping burgers at the grill, wearing that stupid apron that says "Grill Sergeant," that he thinks is hilarious. Nobody even turned around when I opened the back door. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but when you're standing in your graduation gown watching your family celebrate your sister's sorority title while your degree is still warm in your hands, 10 seconds feels like an hour. I turned around, went inside, and found a note on the counter. It was in my mom's handwriting. It said, "Noah, leftovers in the fridge." Elise had big news. "Congrats on your ceremony." "Love, Mom." "Congrats on your ceremony." Like I'd just come back from a dentist appointment. I opened the fridge. There was a plate of potato salad wrapped in foil and a couple pieces of cold fried chicken. I sat at the kitchen table, still in my cap and gown, and ate alone. I could hear them outside. The laughter, the music, Elise's voice doing that thing she does where she tells a story and makes it sound like the most exciting thing that's ever happened. I sat there chewing cold chicken and staring at the wall, and something inside me just clicked off. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. Like someone found the fuse box of my emotions and flipped every switch to off. I finished eating, washed my plate, went upstairs, and sat on my bed for a very long time. The next morning, I was gone. I need to rewind a little bit before I tell you about the morning I left, because I want you to understand that graduation day wasn't a one-off. It was the final domino in a line that had been building for years. That note on the counter, the cold chicken, the empty seat at my ceremony, those weren't accidents. They were a pattern, and I'd been ignoring the pattern because admitting the truth was scarier than pretending everything was fine. I'm not going to catalog every single moment, but I need you to understand the weight I was carrying that night. The graduation wasn't isolated. It was the final entry in a ledger that had been filling up for years. Every missed game, every brushed-off accomplishment, every time they couldn't help with my tuition because they were paying for Elise's sorority dues and meal plan upgrade. All of it was sitting on my chest when I ate that cold chicken. That note on the counter wasn't just a note. It was a summary of my entire existence in that house. So the morning after graduation, I packed a bag. Not everything, just what mattered. Clothes, my laptop, a few books, the letter from UNC Charlotte that I pulled off the fridge, and a photo of my grandmother, my dad's mother, who passed when I was 17. She was the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I was worth paying attention to. She used to call me her quiet storm and said that still waters run the deepest. I missed her every single day. I didn't leave a note. I know that sounds harsh, and maybe it was. But I figured, what's the point? They'd left me a note about leftovers while throwing a party in the backyard. If a note was good enough for my college graduation, then no note was good enough for my departure. Fair is fair. I drove to the apartment I'd already signed a lease on 3 weeks earlier. I'd been planning this, see? Not the dramatic exit, but the move. I had a job lined up at a financial services firm downtown. Entry level, nothing glamorous, but it was a start. The apartment was a tiny one-bedroom above a laundromat, and it smelled vaguely like fabric softener at all hours, which honestly was kind of soothing. I set my bag on the floor, sat on the mattress I'd bought off a guy on the internet for $80, and breathed. For the first time in my life, I was alone in a place that was mine, and the silence didn't hurt. It took my parents 2 full days to notice I was gone. 2 days. Let that sink in. Their 22-year-old son, who had just graduated from college, packed up and left, and it took 48 hours for anyone to realize the room upstairs was empty. Mom texted me on a Tuesday evening. Not called. Texted. It said, "Hey, where are you? Elise wants to borrow your charger." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "We noticed you left." "Elise wants to borrow your charger." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I typed back, "Moved out. Don't need the charger anymore. She can have it." And I turned off my phone. The call started the next day. Mom first, then Dad, then Mom again. I let them all go to voicemail. Dad's first message was casual, almost confused, like he couldn't process that I'd done something without running it by them first. "Hey bud, your mom says you moved out? That's kind of sudden. Give us a call when you get a chance." No urgency, no concern, just mild inconvenience. Mom's voicemail was a little more emotional, but not in the way you'd hope. "Noah, this is really inconsiderate. You didn't even tell us you were leaving. Your father and I are worried." Worried? Right. They were worried the way you're worried when you can't find the TV remote. Mildly annoyed and pretty sure it'll turn up eventually. I didn't call back. Not that day, not that week. I know some of you are thinking that's cold, and maybe it is. But I want you to consider what it feels like to spend your entire life trying to earn a spot in your own family and being told, in 1,000 small ways, that the spot doesn't exist. At some point, you stop knocking on a door that was never going to open. About a week after I moved out, Elise texted me. This one actually stung a little because Elise and I weren't enemies. We weren't close either, but she wasn't cruel the way the situation was. She was just the beneficiary of a system she didn't build. Her text said, "Hey, Mom and Dad are being weird. Are you okay? Did something happen?" I thought about responding for a long time. I even typed out a few different messages. One was honest, one was sarcastic, and one was just, "I'm fine." I went with the last one. 2 words. "I'm fine." Because I didn't have the energy to explain to my sister that the something that happened was every single day of my life in that house. She replied, "Okay, well, we miss you. Come visit soon." And I almost believed her. A month went by, then 2. I threw myself into work, learned the job fast, impressed my manager, a guy named Harlan, who was this no-nonsense former military type who communicated almost entirely in nods and grunts, but somehow made you feel like he saw you. Harlan didn't hand out compliments like candy, so when he told me after my first quarterly review that I was sharp and had good instincts, I nearly fell out of my chair. I started building a life. I bought a rail bed frame from an actual furniture store. I learned to cook something other than ramen and scrambled eggs. I went for runs in the mornings and found a coffee shop near my apartment where the barista, this woman named Sutton, remembered my order after the 3rd visit and started asking me about my day. Small things. Normal things. Things that felt enormous when you'd spent 22 years feeling like a ghost in your own home. And then, about 3 months after I left, my parents tried to pull me back in. It started with Mom showing up at my apartment unannounced. I came home from work and she was sitting in her car in the parking lot. My stomach dropped the second I saw her because I knew this wasn't a caring visit. This was a mission. She had that look on her face, the one she used when she wanted something, and was prepared to guilt trip her way to it. She got out of the car and hugged me, and I'll be honest, for about 2 seconds it felt nice. Then she pulled back and the first words out of her mouth were, "Your sister's birthday is next month and she really wants you there." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I miss you." Not, "We should have been at your graduation." Your sister's birthday. That was the opening line. That was the reason she drove 40 minutes to my apartment. I felt that old familiar numbness creep back in, that fuse box clicking off. I looked at her and said, "I'll think about it." She started to say something else, something about family being important and how Elise would be heartbroken if I didn't come, and I just repeated, "I'll think about it, Mom." She left. I went inside, sat on my bed, and stared at the ceiling for about an hour. And something in me hardened. Not in a bitter way, not in an angry way, just in a way that said, I'm done being the one who adjusts. I'm done being the one who shows up and gets handed a plate of cold chicken and a note. I'm done performing for people who aren't watching. I didn't go to Elise's birthday party. And that, as it turned out, was the first real decision I ever made for myself. It wouldn't be the last. The months after I skipped Elisa's birthday were some of the loneliest of my life, and I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Cutting yourself off from your family, even a family that treated you like an afterthought, doesn't feel heroic. It feels like standing in an empty room and wondering if the silence is peace or just a different kind of pain. For a while, I couldn't tell the difference. I threw myself into work because that was the only thing that made sense. Numbers, spreadsheets, projections, those things followed rules. You put in the effort and the output was predictable. People were not predictable. People could love you and forget you in the same breath. But a balance sheet? A balance sheet was honest. Harlan noticed I was burning the midnight oil. He didn't say anything for 2 weeks, just observed me the way he observed everything. Then one Friday evening he walked past my desk, dropped a business card on it, and said, "My buddy runs a financial planning practice. Pays better. Call him Monday." Then he kept walking. The name on the card was Deacon Merritt. I called Monday, interviewed Wednesday, had an offer by the following week. Sometimes the people who care about you the most don't make a production out of it. They just quietly open a door and let you decide whether to walk through it. Deacon was the opposite of Harlan in every way. He was loud, expressive, told stories that went on for 15 minutes, and somehow circled back to the point right when you thought he'd lost it completely. He was in his mid-50s, had this booming laugh, and ran his practice like a family dinner. Everyone talked, everyone contributed, and if you had a bad idea, he'd tell you it was a bad idea, while simultaneously making you feel smart for having an idea at all. I'd never met anyone like him. The job was a massive step up. I was analyzing portfolios, building financial models, meeting with clients. Deacon saw something in me early on and started giving me more responsibility than my title warranted. After about 4 months, he pulled me into his office and said, "Noah, you've got something most people in this industry don't have. You listen. You actually hear what people are saying, not just the words, but the thing underneath the words. That's rare. Don't ever lose that." I almost told him that I learned to listen because no one ever listened to me, but I kept that to myself. Some truths are better as fuel than conversation. Around this time, I also met someone. Her name was Waverly, and before you ask, yes, that's her real name. And yes, she's heard every joke about it. She was a graphic designer who worked in the building next to mine, and we kept ending up at the same coffee shop at the same time. Sutton, the barista, actually introduced us. She said, "You two are my most dependable customers, and you both look like you could use a friend," which was simultaneously the most forward and most accurate thing anyone had ever said to me. Waverly was funny in a quiet way, the kind of person who'd say something devastating under her breath and then just sip her coffee like she hadn't just ended someone. She was smart, independent, and had this way of looking at you when you were talking that made you feel like the only person in the room. Which, if you've been following my story, you know was exactly the thing I'd been starving for my entire life. We started dating about 2 months after we met. I told her about my family early on because I didn't want to build something on a cracked foundation. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is harder than it sounds when someone's telling you their parents forgot they existed. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she said, "You know you deserved better, right?" Like, not in a motivational poster way. In a factual, objective, this is how decent people behave way. I don't think I'd ever heard anyone say that to me before. Not like that. Not so plainly. Meanwhile, my career was accelerating. Deacon started bringing me to client meetings as a partner, not just an analyst. I was managing accounts, building relationships with clients who had real money and real trust in our firm. My income jumped significantly within my first year there. I paid off the rest of my student loans in one aggressive push. I moved out of the apartment above the laundromat and into a proper one-bedroom with actual counter space and windows that didn't rattle when the wind blew. I started running again too, not competitively, but for myself. Every morning, 5:30, rain or shine. There's something about choosing to be alone that feels completely different from being made to feel alone. One is freedom. The other is a cage. About 9 months after graduation, I got a call from Elise. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to pick up. She sounded different. Quieter. Less performative. She said, "Noah, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to actually hear me out." I said okay. She told me that things at home had changed since I left. Not in a dramatic, everything fell apart way, but in a slow, uncomfortable way. Mom and Dad argued more. Dad had gotten quieter, spent more time in the garage. Mom was drinking wine every night instead of just on weekends and making passive-aggressive comments about how both her kids abandoned her, which was rich considering I was the one who'd been abandoned long before I ever walked out the door. Elise said something that caught me off guard. She said, "I know they treated you differently. I always knew, even when I pretended I didn't. I just didn't know how to fix it without losing what I had." That hit me in a place I didn't know was still tender. My little sister had watched me be ignored for 22 years and stayed quiet, because speaking up might have cost her her spot in the sun. I didn't blame her, not really. She was a kid too, operating in the same messed up system I was. But hearing her admit it out loud did something to me. It validated 22 years of wondering if I was crazy, if I was imagining things, if maybe I really was just being too sensitive like Mom always implied. I told Elise I appreciated her calling. I told her I wasn't angry at her. I told her that I needed more time, and that I wasn't ready to come back to the family dinner table and pretend everything was fine just because the holidays were coming up. She said she understood, and to her credit, she didn't push. Time kept moving. My second year at the firm, Deacon made me a junior partner. I was 24, the youngest person he'd ever promoted to that position. He threw a small celebration at the office, just the team and a cake from the bakery down the street. And when he stood up to say a few words, he called me the future of this firm, and I had to stare very hard at the ceiling to keep myself together. Waverly was there too. She'd brought me a card that said, "Congratulations on being important," on the front, and on the inside she'd written, "You always were. Now everyone else is catching up." I kept that card. I still have it. I was building a life that looked nothing like the one I'd left behind. I had a partner who saw me, a mentor who believed in me, a career that was growing faster than I'd ever imagined, and a sense of self-worth that I'd constructed brick by brick from the ground up. Nobody handed me any of it. Nobody threw me a party or bought me a car or posted about my accomplishments with 3 exclamation points and a heart emoji. I built it all myself, in the quiet, the way I'd always done everything. And I was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not performing happiness. Not convincing myself I should be happy. Just happy. The real kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience. Which is, of course, exactly when my father decided to call. 12 months after graduation. 12 months of silence from the man who couldn't be bothered to watch me walk across the stage. 12 months. And then my phone buzzed with a voicemail from a number I hadn't deleted but had stopped looking for. Dad left a voicemail. 1 minute and 43 seconds. I saw the notification, stared at it for a long time, and set the phone face down on the counter. I haven't played it. I know what you're thinking. Play the voicemail, Noah. What are you, a monster? It's your dad. Just listen to it. And I get it, I really do. If this were someone else's story, I'd probably be in the comments saying the same thing. But here's the thing about being the kid who was never enough. Every gesture from the people who hurt you feels like a trap. Not because they're necessarily trying to trap you, but because your entire nervous system has been trained to expect disappointment. Every olive branch looks like it might be a stick. So I left the voicemail unplayed. Not as a power move, not as revenge. I just wasn't ready. I needed to sit with it, to figure out if listening to my father's voice would pull me backward into the version of myself I'd spent a year escaping. Waverly told me to take my time, and Deacon, who I'd opened up to a little about my family, said something that stuck with me. He said, "Noah, you don't owe anyone access to your peace. Not even your parents. Especially not the ones who never gave you any." Life kept moving. The firm was growing, and so was my role in it. Deacon started talking about retirement in that vague way people do when they're testing the waters. He'd say things like, "You know, I've been thinking about spending more time at the lake house," or "Waverly's got you domesticated. Maybe I should let my wife domesticate me before it's too late." But underneath the jokes, I could tell he was serious. He was grooming me to take over the practice, and the weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and deeply affirming. Around the 14-month mark after graduation, something happened that changed the entire trajectory of this story. Elise called me again. This time she wasn't reflective or apologetic. She was panicked. "Noah, Dad lost his job." I sat down. "What do you mean he lost his job?" "The company restructured. His whole department got cut. He's been out for 3 weeks, and he didn't tell anyone. Mom found out when she saw the severance paperwork on his desk." I processed this quietly. My father, The man who spent 30 years in commercial insurance, who defined himself entirely by his stability and his ability to provide, was unemployed. And he'd hidden it. For 3 weeks. That part didn't surprise me. My family's primary language was avoidance. Elise continued. It's bad, Noah. They've got the mortgage, Mom's hours got cut at the dental office last month, and Dad's been just sitting in the garage pretending to organize tools. He won't talk to anyone. Mom's freaking out. What do you want me to do about it, Elise? There was a pause. A long one. Then she said, I don't know. I just thought you should know. I told her I was sorry to hear it, and I meant that. Whatever my father had done to me, or more accurately hadn't done, I didn't wish financial ruin on him. But I also noticed something in Elise's voice, a frequency I recognized because I'd heard it in my own voice for years. She was hoping I'd fix it. She was hoping the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who always figured things out without making a fuss, would step in and handle the situation that the golden child and the attentive parents couldn't manage on their own. And for the first time, I felt something I'd never felt toward my family before. Not anger, not sadness, not numbness. I felt the irony, the cosmic, almost comedic irony of the child they forgot suddenly being the one they needed. I didn't act on it right away. I went home, told Waverly, and she looked at me with that steady gaze of hers and said, What do you want to do? Not what should you do? Not what's the right thing to do. What do you want to do? I loved her for asking it that way. I don't know yet, I said, but I'm not going to rush into anything. Over the next few weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I thought about my family strategically, not manipulatively, but deliberately. I asked myself what outcome I actually wanted, not what outcome would make them comfortable, not what outcome would make me look like the bigger person, but what I actually needed for my own healing. I talked to a therapist. Her name was Rosalind, and she was this calm, unflappable woman who had a way of asking questions that made you answer your own problems. I told her about the graduation, the note, the cold chicken, the years of invisibility. She didn't gasp or look horrified. She just nodded and said, So you learned very early that your needs weren't a priority, and now they need you, and you're trying to figure out if meeting their needs means abandoning your own again. I could have hugged her. That was exactly it. Rosalind helped me understand something critical. She said that reconciliation isn't the same as restoration. You can reconnect with people without giving them back the power to hurt you. You can forgive without forgetting. You can show up without going back. That distinction changed everything. I started formulating a plan, not a revenge plan, because this isn't that kind of story. A boundary plan. Here's what I'm willing to give and here's what I'm not plan. I talked to Waverly about it, talked to Rosalind, even talked to Deacon, who despite being a financial advisor had surprisingly good emotional intelligence for a guy whose idea of expressing feelings was a firm handshake and a nod. Here's what I decided. I would reach out to my parents. I would offer to help, not because they deserved it, but because I had the means and I'd rather live as the kind of person who helps than the kind who doesn't. But I would do it on my terms. With conditions. With boundaries so clear you could see them from space. I called Elise first. I'm going to come home, I said. But I need you to understand something. I'm not coming back to be the quiet kid who eats cold chicken and pretends it's fine. I'm coming back as an adult with things to say, and they're going to hear them. All of them, including you. She was quiet for a second, then said, Okay, that's fair. And Elise, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for me. I know, she said, and I believed her. I spent the next week preparing. Not in a dramatic, writing a speech on index cards way, but internally. I thought about what I wanted to say. I thought about every moment that had cut me, every silence that had spoken louder than words, every time I'd been treated like an accessory in my own life. And I thought about who I was now. The junior partner. The guy with the beautiful girlfriend and the mentor who called him the future. The guy who built himself from scratch in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like fabric softener. I wasn't the invisible kid anymore. And it was time they knew it. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday morning. I brought Waverly with me, not as a shield, but as a witness. I wanted someone there who knew the real me, the me I'd become, not the me my parents had decided I was. I pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same. The hedges were a little overgrown, the paint on the shutters was starting to peel, and Dad's truck was in the driveway with a layer of dust on it that told me it hadn't moved in a while. Everything about the place looked tired, like the house itself had given up on pretending. I sat in the car for a minute. Waverly put her hand on mine and said, "You've got this. And whatever happens in there, we're going home together after." I took a breath, opened the door, and walked up to the front porch. The same porch where I used to sit as a kid reading books while Elise's laughter echoed from inside. The same porch where my grandmother used to sit with me on summer evenings and tell me I was her quiet storm. I knocked on the door. My mother opened it, and for a moment, she just stared at me like she was looking at a stranger. In a way, she was. My mother stood in the doorway looking at me like I'd materialized out of thin air. She was thinner than I remembered, the lines around her eyes deeper, wearing an old cardigan I recognized from when I was in middle school. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than sleep. "Noah," she said, and her voice cracked on the second syllable. "Hey, Mom." She hugged me, and I let her, but I didn't melt into it. I hugged her back the way you hug someone at a funeral, present but measured. I introduced Waverly, and Mom did that thing where she tried to be welcoming while clearly thrown off balance by the fact that her estranged son had shown up with a woman she'd never met. The house smelled the same. Coffee and that lavender thing Mom used to spray on the curtains. But it felt different. Quieter. Smaller. The backyard where they'd thrown Elise's party was visible through the kitchen window, and I looked at it the way you'd look at a crime scene. Calmly, but aware of everything. Dad was in the living room. He stood up when I walked in, and the first thing I noticed was that he'd aged badly. Not gradually, but the way people age when something inside them breaks. He'd lost weight, his hair was grayer, and his eyes had a hollowed-out quality I recognized from my own worst days. "Son," he said. "Dad, we didn't hug. We just stood there, two men separated by about 8 feet and 22 years of things that should have been said but weren't." Elise arrived about 10 minutes later. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Then she met Waverly and immediately said, "Oh, thank God, you look like a normal person." I was worried he'd show up with someone who also reads financial reports for fun. Waverly laughed. I almost did too. We sat down in the living room, and for a few minutes nobody said anything meaningful. Mom offered coffee. Dad talked about the weather. It was the most painfully familiar scene of my life. Everyone performing normalcy, while an elephant the size of a freight train sat in the room. So I addressed the elephant. "I didn't come here for small talk," I said. My voice was calm, steady. I'd practiced this with Rosalind, not the words, but the tone. She told me to speak from my chest, not my throat. To say what I meant without apologizing for meaning it. Everyone went quiet. I came here because Elise told me about Dad's job, and I want to help. But before we talk about that, there are some things I need to say, and I need you to actually hear them. Not nod and change the subject. Not tell me I'm being too sensitive. Hear them. Mom opened her mouth, and I held up my hand. "Please, just let me talk." I took a breath and started. Graduation day, May 17th. I walked across the stage and collected a degree I worked 4 years for while holding down a job and paying my own way. Neither of you were there. You were in the backyard throwing a party for Elise because she was named vice president of her sorority. When I came home, still in my cap and gown, there was a note on the counter that said leftovers in the fridge. I ate cold chicken alone at the kitchen table while I could hear you laughing outside. Mom's face crumbled. Dad stared at the floor. That wasn't the first time. That was the last time. The last in a line that goes back as far as I can remember. The car Elise got that I didn't. The dinners for her achievements while mine got a "that's nice, honey." The acceptance letter I put on the fridge myself that took 2 days for anyone to notice. Elise was crying quietly. I didn't look at her because I knew if I did I'd lose my composure. I'm not saying you're bad people. I'm not saying you didn't love me. I'm saying you didn't see me. And there's a difference between not loving someone and not seeing them. But the damage feels pretty much the same when you're the one who's invisible. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock on the mantel ticking. Dad spoke first. His voice was rough, like he'd been swallowing sandpaper. "Noah, I didn't realize it was that bad. I know you didn't. That's the problem. It shouldn't have taken me leaving for you to notice I was here." Mom was full-on crying now. "I'm sorry," she said. And to her credit, she didn't try to explain it away or make excuses. She just said it, over and over. "I'm so sorry, Noah." I let her cry. I didn't rush to comfort her because I'd spent my whole life managing other people's emotions at the expense of my own, and Rosalind had helped me understand that I didn't have to do that anymore. Then I said, "Here's what I'm willing to do. I've done well for myself. I have the means to help with the mortgage while Dad finds a new position. I can connect him with people in my network who might have leads. But I'm not doing it as the grateful son who's just happy to be invited back. I'm doing it as an adult who's choosing to help, and I need you to understand that this doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't fix us. It's just me being the kind of person I want to be. Dad looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't distraction or indifference. It was respect. Not the performative kind you give to strangers, but the real kind. The kind you give to someone who just showed you exactly who they are and didn't flinch. "You grew up," he said quietly. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a hallmark moment. But it was honest, and from my father, honest was new territory. I had to, I said. Nobody was going to do it for me. That landed the way I intended it to. Not as a weapon, but as a fact. A simple, irrefutable fact. We talked for another hour. Some of it was productive, logistics about the mortgage, job leads for Dad. Some of it was hard. Mom trying to explain without excusing, Elise admitting she'd known and stayed quiet. Dad struggling to articulate feelings he'd apparently never been taught to have. It wasn't a movie scene. Nobody delivered a monologue that fixed everything. It was messy and uncomfortable and incomplete, which is exactly what real healing looks like. Before I left, Dad walked me to the car. He stood there with his hands in his pockets and said, "That voicemail I left you, did you ever listen to it?" "No." He nodded. "It wasn't a good message. I didn't say the right things. I never know how to say the right things with you, and that's my fault." That was the closest my father had ever come to a real apology. "Maybe someday you can try again," I said. "In person." He looked at me with wet eyes and nodded. Waverly and I drove home in silence. She held my hand the entire way. When we parked, she said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "Light," I said. "I feel light." That was a year ago. Here's where things stand now. Dad found a new job through a contact Deacon connected him with. Smaller firm, steady work. Mom started seeing a therapist, which shocked everyone, including Mom. Elise and I talk regularly now. Real conversations, not surface-level pleasantries. She actually asked me for career advice last month, which was a first. My parents and I aren't fixed. We're not a sitcom family that hugged it out over pie. We're a work in progress. But the difference is that I'm no longer performing for their approval. I show up when I choose to, on terms I set, and I leave when I need to. Deacon officially retired last month. He handed me the keys to the practice, and I'm not ashamed to say we both got a little emotional about it. I'm 27 years old, and I run my own wealth management firm. Let me say that again because I still can't quite believe it. Waverly and I moved in together. She hung a framed print in the hallway that says, "Still waters run deep." And every time I walk past it, I think of my grandmother. I still haven't played that voicemail. I probably never will. It belongs to a version of me and a version of my father that don't exist anymore. Whatever he said in those 1 minute and 43 seconds, it was said to a boy who was invisible. I'm not that boy anymore. And the next time my father has something to say to me, I want him to say it to the man I've become. Face to face. Out loud. Where I can see his eyes and know he means it. I'm Noah. I'm 27. I run a firm. I have a woman who loves me. And I built every piece of my life with my own 2 hands in the quiet. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this. You are not invisible. Not because someone finally decides to see you, but because you were never invisible in the first place. The people who couldn't see you were just standing in the wrong light.